Today at ShopTab.com, we're going to be buttoning up our Scirocco and preparing to go to Wookies in the Woods. So if you watched the video series on the Scirocco, you probably know there was a few things we had to cut corners on to make sure that we had enough time to get the entire build done and get home. Now we're gonna have more time to have the car in the shop and take care of all the things that we couldn't take care of before we head to Wookies, assuming it doesn't break before it gets to the Dragon. So the first thing we're dealing with is going to be the speedometer. We drove this car all the way using GPS speedometer instead of the actual speedometer. Now on old cars, this is a cable-driven speedometer. So this has a attachment that goes here that has a cable that runs from here into the engine compartment, attaches to the transmission, and that would be what drives the speedometer. This is the cable here that goes to the cluster. This is the OXS box, and then it has the other side that would pass through, and this would go to your transmission. Fun fact, the OXS box is a tripped a light that was supposed to have you go and get your oxygen sensor inspected for whatever reason. This part is the part that goes into the transmission, or would go into the other transmission. And obviously this, being for a different transmission, this would spline onto a drive that's on a differential, but this is wrong for this transmission, so we have to get a different cable. So this is the cable that I purchased, and this is supposed to be specifically for the Scirocco cluster and then go into an O2J trans. So if you look right here on top of the differential, this is the top of the transmission in the back. This is the drive sensor that would be for vehicle speed, and on our TDC harness, it actually has a plug for this. Since we're not using the electronic vehicle speed signal, we're just gonna be taking this off and swapping that manual cable right on top of this. Okay, so this is the actual sensor portion. This is the drive portion. So you have to separate them, and then you can thread on the new cable portion to this guy right here and put this back in the trans. Now that cable is specific for swap, so you have to buy one that's for swapping an O2J trans into this specific car. We're not ready to reinstall our cluster yet because I want to make sure that all the other gauges that we're going to use are going to function properly. That way if we need to do any wiring pinouts or stuff like that, we're not dealing with taking this out again. Now another thing we need to address is our oil leak. So when we got back from our 700-mile trip, as we were getting off the exit, literally 3 miles away from our warehouse, Charles and I smelled an oil leak, and we smelled an oil burning smell. And so we were like, well, yeah, is that this car? Or is there someone in front of us that has an oil burning issue? Kind of tossed it off, no big deal. Assumed everything was fine. When we got back to the shop, we found this. What we suspect, and well, what I know, was self-induced. See, when we were running this engine and we were doing all the different things of starting stuff up and trying to figure out what we were doing and had all the problems we had, at one point we had plugged this right here on the valve cover. And what that did was created way too much crank pressure and hiss out of the valve cover. It's the valve covers. Oh, probably it's not vented.
You're probably 100% right.
Specifically, it was coming from right here. So we heard a hissing coming from this area. So we removed that cap because that was on there and we were dumb. Now we have a valve cover leak. So we know at minimum this is where our oil leak is. The other concern, and we have basically the way you diagnose an oil leak is fix known oil leaks at the highest point, clean it, and then check it and verify. And so the valve cover gasket on this, to replace it, the intake manifold needs to come off for a 4th time since this engine has been installed into this car. But I haven't had to do any of the other ones because Charles did all the other ones. But Charles isn't here anymore, so now I have to do this one. Or I'll call Charles and see if he wants to do it. But I'm betting he's gonna say no. Now, because we were worried about the condition of the wiring in the car and we didn't want to have to deal with diagnosing that, this was what we had as a solution to start and run the car. We are gonna be getting rid of this and wiring this into the car properly, which is where these wiring diagrams come into play. I deal with wiring more than I care to. Now this fuse block is something that would be on a Mark IV, and it goes on top of the battery. Now what it does is it allows us to fuse all kinds of power stuff. So we had a couple of these eyelets right here that were just tacked on to the side of the battery right here. Number one, I'm not a big fan of that. Number two, it isn't the right aesthetic of what I'm looking for, and we needed more power sources. If you take a look at this fan wiring, this is the fan relay that we wired up to try to make it work. it didn't work because these wires are just old and shitty. If these are supposed to be different color wires. This one's red and white, this one's red and black, this one's brown, this one's also brown. They all kind of look like the same color because they're all corroded and crappy and destroyed. So if you look right there, that's probably a good reason why that our fans were not working. That is disgusting and corroded. Gosh. Yeah, it's real bad. Obviously, for that reason, we need to get the fans working before we can drive this to Wookies in the Woods and then overheat there. So part of this is to be able to have a source for both the fans, to have a new source for the fans, and then also I'm going to relay the headlights. So a big issue on Mark 1 cars is the power for the headlights, meaning the power output for the lights, runs through the headlight switch. But generally this becomes a choke point for power for the headlights. So if you recall, there may be some footage of us driving down the highway, and here is the low beams, and then here are the high beams. Now, I do have new sealed beam units for this car. We have them for all 4 lights in this car, and old cars, if you're not familiar, have sealed beam units. They look like this, and this whole guy just gets replaced instead of a bulb. We are gonna be both rewiring these to have power directly to the lights and then have them be relayed. And then we are also gonna install new ones, which should accomplish making these headlights actually function as headlights instead of just at best fog lights, or a flashlight out the window would be better. When we originally had this engine swap done and we were in Florida, we didn't cut out the original wiring harness on the car. That was because some of it we thought we may need to reuse in some instance, and we did have to reuse later for the instrument cluster and different other wiring related. So now I'm going to be cleaning up and cutting out all the wiring we don't need and repurposing what we do need. Wookies prep includes bleeding. It also includes new brakes. So if you know this car, the Scirocco, the front brakes were absolute trash. And so to not die on the Dragon, new brakes all the way around. So stock front brakes, 9-inch rotors, and on the rear, drum brakes. So we're gonna be replacing the drum brakes with new drum brakes instead of a rear disc conversion, because it is my understanding that Scirocco's, maybe this is a Mark 1 thing in general, is when you upgrade them to rear disc, they have proportioning valve issues, which causes the rear brakes to lock up under hard braking, and I don't want to die, so I'm not with that. Okay, so here's our new setup. These are G60 calipers. You can obviously see slotted discs and then EBC red stuff pads. I painted these so they don't look terrible. They were in a little rough shape. And then here's the old stuff. To get these to work, we have to use these adapters to bolt these to the knuckle, and then it allows us to do this. There was a little bit of fabricating and different things to get all that together. And so, our brakes. We're also going to be putting this catback exhaust, because that one has the sometime replaced garbage original, like 1 3/4 inch exhaust. So this should sound better and give us a little more free flowing. Okay, all right. Here is our old crusty exhaust. This is going away. And if you saw when we were building this car, this guy,
oh God,
is going away. And now we're just gonna cut this thing off, because this thing is a piece of shit. It's not worth anything. So to make my life easy, we're gonna cut it off. Oh, that fell off. I didn't loosen that, that just fell off.
Oh, so we had an exhaust leak this entire time.
If you consider 2 pieces of exhaust that aren't held together by anything a leak, then yes.
I would. Oh God.
This is what happens when you have, these are called crush bends, so you just crush them. Yeah. Yeah. Seems to have been a strategic error somewhere.
So this is how you work on cars. Got it.
This is how you work on cars. In case you haven't watched our video series of the building this car, this is how we work on cars. That's what you do. You create problems, then you solve them. It's like a grandfather clock. I should have just done this the right way. It would have taken me less time. Here we go. Crushed and bent. Once I've cut that exhaust off in the worst possible fashion I could absolutely do, we reinstalled the exhaust. As with any exhaust install, you want to hear a before and after. So here you go before. after.
Dude, that does sound way better.
I told you. I told you it sounded way better. One thing I was surprised at after installing this exhaust was actually the power. This car actually felt like it had significantly more power afterwards, and I could assume that possibly because the factory exhaust or the original crush bent crappy exhaust that was on that Scirocco had a heavy restriction on the engine. It caused too much back pressure that made it feel like it had less power. I don't know. I'm not somebody who generally goes with the butt dyno is the end all be all. Most people have kind of the placebo effect when they mod their car. I generally don't have that happen, so I think it actually made more power afterwards. Now we're gonna head out to Wookies, and as you can imagine, I think you could guess what happens next. After arriving in Fontana Village for Wookies in the Woods, Nathan and I were kind of getting situated. He was driving behind me in his car, and he notified me via the radio that the Scirocco had a wobble in the rear wheel.
What happened, Paul?
Well, Nathan said the rear wheel looked like it may have been a little bit waggling.
It wasn't a little bit, by the way. It was a lot of waggle.
It was a lot of waggling. Assume there's something related to the wheel bearings because I took them out, and I assume something related to that has loosened up. So that's real neat. I'm not happy that I'm dealing with problems because I'd rather be hanging out. Dude, that's tight. Hey Charles, we're over here at the general store dealing with a generally potentially broken Scirocco. So, we gotta take that off. We gotta take this cotter pin out, which is a pain in the and then we gotta tighten this nut up behind here. Okay. So.
Oh yeah.
All the way.
Let's
well, I mean, this one I would consider to be a self-induced problem if the race isn't seated all the way. One of the guys who works at the shop was able to come this morning and bring us some tools that we need for this to get the bearing race seated properly, or at least that's the goal. And so we're gonna take a swing at it.
No, it looks pretty straight. I mean, it's got a little bit of a wobble, but not like.
Okay.
I don't think it's gonna be that bad.
Let's see. Yeah. It's there.
A little bit. That'll probably get you home.
Yeah.
well, hey.
Hey, what's going on?
I thought if I waited long enough and drug my feet, you'd be finished by the time I got here.
So you didn't have to work on it?
Yeah.
In that case, you'd be right.
Yes.
So
Victory.
I hammered the rear race out.
Okay.
Put it back in, spun the wheel. It's better.
Okay.
But it's not perfect. I'm thinking that this drum is bad because it can't seat all the way down properly. You can kind of see, like, if you look at this side here.
Yeah, it looks like there's a gap.
Yeah, there's a gap there, and then you look at the other side, it's not like that.
So either the race is torqued sideways,
or
it's warped or something.
Yeah. I'm not gonna take it down the dragon, but yeah.
I mean, it might destroy the race, it might destroy the bearing. Who cares?
Right. Well, yeah.
You're gonna put new ones on anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
The worst case, I mean, as long as the wheel doesn't fall off.
Right.
The worst case is
the wheel falls off.
It also messes up the stub axle, which I mean, putting a stub axle on it is easy and wouldn't hurt the life of the car anyway.
We put everything else in this car.
Just keep replacing parts until there's no more parts to replace, and then something else will break.
And then you'll have a Mark 1.
Dang.
I think it's gonna be much different.
Well,
the conclusion is that it still has a problem, but we think it's gonna be drivable. Let's hope we get home without the wheel falling off drivable.
Oh, really?
That kind of drivable.
Oh, okay.
Stay tuned to see if we get home without the wheel falling off.
Oh, okay.
yeah, I just put my camera away because I thought we were done having problems.
That's cool, I got it. I'm on it.
I thought we were done having problems too, but apparently we're not. So I was notified when I started up that we have a fuel leak, which is right here. Nothing's been done with these fuel lines since Florida, so me, right? We are at the sound off. I did resolve our fuel leak that only required me to tighten the clamp that apparently has been loose for 900 miles. And then I've started leaking fuel in the parking lot after we tried to fix our wheel bearing semi-successfully. So Ready, get ready for sound off.
Are you gonna blow the engine up at the sound off?
Vroom vroom. We can't. Charles and I built this so well, it's impossible to blow up.
This clip's
He's laughing.
This clip is gonna be used after it blows up.
After our 4-hour trip back from Wookies in the Woods, we did have a lot of vibration coming home, but no wheel fell off and we made it home safely with no damage, no breakdowns. It was good-ish, good-ish. Now we have to diagnose the car and figure out what we need to actually fix before we go to Helen for Alpine Volksfair. If you're not familiar with the show in Helen, Georgia, we have a meet on Friday evening. Charles and us together have a meet. We will link to it in the description where you can check that out. And to end this video, a launch clip of a VR6 Scirocco.